If you're watching this video, you probably understand the basics of good pickleball strategy. However, as you progress through the sport, there's multiple things that no one talks about that you need to know. These are double strategies that are less obvious, but work extremely well. If you're trying to improve, I highly recommend you watch this full video so that you can try out all these tips the next time you go play. Helping me today, I have my sister Kennedy. So the first strategy that no one ever talks about is the strategy of putting the ball away. So when you're up at the kitchen and you have easy shots, it's not just about hitting the ball hard. If you hit the ball hard, it's going to work against a certain level player, but as your opponents get better and better, you need to have a specific strategy of where you're aiming and why, depending on the shot. So not every easy shot at the kitchen is the same. So when it comes to these easy shots, let's divide them into two categories. The first category is option one, where we're hitting higher balls, but they're below the height of our head. So it looks something like this. We can go hard here, but obviously it's not the easiest possible shot. Option two are easy shots that are high and slow, probably above the height of our head. So as you can imagine, these you can go even harder on and they're easier and you have a better opportunity to end the point. So when it comes to option one versus option two shots, you need to be thinking about it differently in terms of where you're aiming. So if I have an option one shot, slightly lower high ball, I don't have as much of an ability to open up the court with angles. So on these shots, generally, I'm either gonna be going middle or at my opponent's feet. Especially if one of my opponents is starting to move forward, it makes more sense to go at their feet because they don't have enough time to react. On option two shots, I have a higher ball, right? So I have more of an ability to open up the court with angles. And depending on how high it is, I can really start to spread out the court. The problem is, in a point, you're rarely given an option two shot on the get-go. A lot of the time you have an option one shot that sets up your option two shot that you can take off the court. So the main thing to consider is that when you have a slightly lower ball, you might not be able to end the point in one shot, but we're using a two-shot combo where we go from option one to option two, and you use the first shot to open up the court to go for a put-away on your next shot that ends the point. And it's totally fine if you have these shots and your opponents keep getting the ball back. You're not always going to be able to end the point in two shots. Sometimes it might take you 4 shots, 5 shots. You just need to be considering where the height of each one of your putaways is and then choose the appropriate targets to give yourself the most possible consistency. And stay tuned because later in the video, I'm going to show you how it's okay to cross over the center line and ball hog a little bit when you're doing these shots. All right, so the next strategy is also something I barely ever hear coaches talk about. And it's something that not many players understand, but is super important and pros use it all the time. So it's that when you're dinking, you don't always need to be the player that's being aggressive, trying to take control and speed the ball up. A lot of the time, you're actually better off being a little bit more passive and letting your opponent speed up so that you can counterattack.
And in order to explain this strategy a little bit better, we want to focus on the two different kinds of dinks. So a push dink is our option one, and that's going to be when you're hitting the dink a little bit deeper inside the kitchen. And our second option is a lift dink, when you're going to be hitting it a little bit shorter in the kitchen.
So you can think about these dinks as aggressive dinks versus safe dinks. So a lot of the time when you have an easy dink, it makes more sense to go for a push dink where I'm trying to get my opponent to pop the ball up so that I can take control. But as I mentioned, a lot of the time your opponents are going to be so good at dinking and so good at counterattacks that even when you do this, they cancel you and you can't win the point. So it's totally fine if you're in a dinking situation to take a more passive approach and go for more lift dinks and force your opponent to speed the ball up so you can be the one that's counterattacking. And the benefit of lift dinking, we're hitting the ball closer to the net. We're hitting it shorter in the kitchen. So your opponents don't have as good of an angle over the net. So when they go for an attack here, it might actually be a worse opportunity that gives you the chance to counterattack at a more downward trajectory. So when you're using this strategy, you're essentially trying to make your opponents impatient while dinking so that they make a bad decision and you can take advantage of that. So remember, you don't always need to be the one pushing, trying to take control. A lot of the time, if you're in a closer matchup, it makes more sense to let your opponents make bad decisions so that you can counterattack. So the next strategy is something that's pretty controversial, and it has to do with the drop shot. So the drop shot is where we hit the ball super short when our opponents are back so that they can't get to it in time. And it's not to be confused with the drop, which is where you go into the kitchen from the back so that you can move forward. So the drop and the drop shot are different. Some people use those names interchangeably, but they're not to be confused with each other. So most coaches, when they tell you about the drop shot, are gonna say that it doesn't work because your opponents can get in and they're gonna be quick enough to get to the ball and it just lets them come into the kitchen. However, the reason that most coaches say this is because most of us are playing at like a 5-0 level to where our opponents are generally pretty quick, have good reaction time, and they can take advantage of you using the drop shot. So while that is true at a high level, drop shots are not the most effective. At a recreational level, from a 3-0 to 4-0 level, most players are not that fast, and you could totally use the drop shot like I just did there, and it's gonna work a pretty good amount of the time if you do it right. So when you're playing, just make sure you assess whether or not your opponents are quick, and the drop shot could totally work for you.
So all you need to do to hit a successful drop shot is to make sure that you're aiming for the kitchen and you're getting a little bit of backspin on the ball.
And the best time to go for this shot is not when your opponents are trying to move forward. So if I hit a drop and Kennedy goes for a drop shot, that's the easiest shot ever for me to get back, right? The best time to do it is when they expect you to keep them back. So a lot of the time, if your opponent is driving off of their back foot, a drop shot's super effective because I'm not necessarily moving forward. So it takes me a lot longer to get my momentum going forward to get to that shot. So if your opponent is in a worse position and they're going for a drive, that's one of the best times to go for it because it takes significantly longer for me to get my energy going forward to get to that ball. The one thing I'll say about this shot though is that you should not use it too often or your opponents are going to start predicting that you're gonna do it and they're gonna start running before you even hit the ball. So use it maybe 1 to 2 times a game, depending on who you're playing and how well it's working, and you'll have a ton of success with it. So this next strategy has to do with a mistake that your partner might be making, and it looks like this. So a lot of the time, if you hit a good drop, you're assuming that everyone's supposed to come in. So when we give lessons, we say, when you hit a good drop, you and your partner should move forward. But as you probably are aware, when you're playing at a random open play, sometimes your partner isn't always going to be following that strategy perfectly. So what you can do to take advantage of this is, let's say you notice your partner hasn't come in, you can do what's called the poach. So this isn't just apply to drops, you can also do it on drives where it's more the shake and bake. But all you need to know is that just because your partner isn't coming in when they should, doesn't mean you can't use it as an opportunity to attack. Because when I'm up and my partner is back, it's almost certain if my opponents are playing smart, they're gonna try to hit to them. So you can predict that, use anticipation to cross over. So a lot of coaches just don't talk about this because they're assuming that both players are following the strategy properly. But as I mentioned, doesn't always happen. So use this as an opportunity to work on the poach. It's a great way to surprise your opponents and take control of the point, even when your partner isn't necessarily playing perfectly according to plan. So the next strategy I see that not many people talk about has to do with how you're targeting your opponent. So partner by partner, who you're aiming for. So one thing to consider is that a lot of people say pickleball is not a 50-50 game because a lot of the time, one player is covering more of the court than the other. But it's also not a 50-50 game in how you should be targeting your opponents. So there's a few specific examples of this that I want to take you through. The first is the return. So if your opponents are serving to you and you notice that one of them has a worse third shot, you should target them more often. So let's say I notice Kennedy has the worst third shot. It's going to be a lot more effective for me to take my returns to her because I'll have a better opportunity to take advantage of my fourth shot. If her partner never misses their drops or drives, it's just going to be harder to win. So Kennedy might not even be the worst player, but it makes more sense on my return to go towards Kennedy. The same thing applies to dinks and speed ups. If I'm having kitchen rallies and I notice that one player is worse at dinking or worse at responding to speed ups, I can simply hit to them more. And this doesn't mean that they're worse at playing pickleball. They might just be worse at this one part of the game. This is the player that I want to take these shots to and attack to more often. You don't need to feel like you need to be going back and forth on these players. And you could even get more specific with this and specifically target one player's backhand or forehand, for instance. So when you're playing against a team, you should try to figure out the weakest shot at the kitchen when it comes to dinking and when it comes to responding to speed ups, and that should be where you target most of your shots. So if I'm playing against Kennedy and her partner's not missing any dinks, but I notice that she has a weak backhand dink, I'm gonna take more dinks to her backhand. I don't have to hit every dink here. And then odds are she'll pop one up and give me an opportunity to attack like that. And on speed ups, if I notice that whenever I go to Kennedy's forehand, she's missing or giving me, an opportunity to take control like that, I can start to target that more than all the rest of the targets I could go for. So all you need to know is that when thinking about where to target your opponents, it shouldn't be a 50-50 thing. Try to find the weakest sections of their game and target them accordingly. The next strategy that no one really talks about, but that works super well, is using change-ups. So a change-up is when you deviate from your normal strategy or the normal shot you would go for in a situation, and you go for something a little bit different. And the goal of this is to throw off your opponent. So at the pro level, these players are really good at responding to these sorts of shots. You don't see this as much at the high level, but at the 3-0 to 4-0 level, these shots work so well. So I highly advise if you're in that range that you try these out, and I guarantee you'll have a lot of success. So one example of a good change-up shot is to deviate from a normal serve. So a normal serve is pretty much a heavy, hard topspin serve like I hit there. Generally, if you watch a good player, they're using that serve most of the time. On the serve, there's two main change-ups that I like to consider. One is a side spin serve, so you can spin it both ways. That was a screwball. You can also go for a banana serve, which curves the other way. The other way you can throw in a change-up on your serve is by adding a little bit more height to it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a full-on lob serve, but just adding a little bit more height can make the bounce more erratic and make things tougher for your opponents to respond. So I have videos on these serves. I'm not gonna go super in depth on the technique here, but just know that by occasionally changing up your serve, you might get a free point. Your opponents might not respond to it very well, and it keeps them guessing so that whenever you step up to the line, they don't know what you're going to do. So serves are definitely the easiest time to throw in change-ups since you have full control. You can also do this on the return too, and some other shots which we're gonna cover. On the return, there's also two ways that I like to mix things up. So the first is side spin. It's a little bit tricky to use side spin on a return, but I've actually been starting to see pros do this. When you throw in a side spin return, it makes it really hard to time a third shot drop. So if you have that technique down, recommend trying doing it on a return. It's a little bit challenging, but it's very effective. The other thing you can do is just go for a harder return or a topspin return. So if you're playing someone that's giving you weak serves like that, and you're going for normal slice returns, or you're just hitting it at a normal pace, you can occasionally juice it up, add some extra pace on it. It's a little bit risky, but if you make it in, it makes it really hard for them to hit a good third shot. Definitely don't do this every time because it might decrease your consistency, but occasionally going for a harder return is gonna throw off your opponents, and it's gonna keep them guessing as to what you're gonna do when you're returning. Another way that you can mix it up or throw in a change up is by attacking in a time where you normally wouldn't. So an example of this is at the kitchen. Generally at the kitchen, you're supposed to wait for a higher ball that's popped up to go for a speed up on. But occasionally you see pros do this a lot. You can go for an attack in a bad situation and you might catch your opponents off guard because they're not expecting it. So if I'm dinking with Kennedy and she hits a good dink, but then out of nowhere, I speed up at her, she might just not be ready for it because it looks like I'm about to dink, and then I go for an attack. So definitely don't do this every point. But if you do this occasionally, you can throw your opponents off, and they're always going to be guessing as to whether or not you're going to hit a speed up. Don't get too predictable. Throw in the occasional change up, and your opponents are never going to know what you're going to do.
And if you want more bang for your buck when it comes to getting spin, you need a gritty paddle like this. When it comes to service materials, there's a reason why 90% of pros use the same T700 carbon fiber. It's because it's proven to give you the most RPMs. So if you want to try this material and you don't want to spend over $200, use code YouTube to get $20 off our paddles. We have 3 different options for whatever your budget is.
The next strategy that doesn't get talked about is that when your opponent is getting in slow off the return, you actually shouldn't use a drop anymore. Because if I'm standing right here and my opponent's hitting their third shot, when they hit a drop, look what happens. So the ball goes into the kitchen. It's actually pretty easy for me to attack it as I'm moving forward. What you want to do is go for a drive or a hybrid at your opponent's feet. So if Kennedy goes for a hybrid here, look what happens. She can immediately move in and attack me and take control of the point. So you're doing yourself a disservice by not going for a drive or a hybrid when you see your opponent in this situation. So let's see an example of this. Kennedy hits me a deep serve, which causes me to get in slow. She sees this, hits it right at my feet, and can move forward and attack immediately. A lot of the time at the 3-0, even to 4-5 level, players just don't get in fast because maybe they're not quick, maybe they're just being lazy. When you see this happening, take advantage of this, and winning is going to be so much easier. All right, so this next tip has to do with ball hogging, which I mentioned earlier, and who covers the middle. So you might already think the left side player covers the middle, which if you watch pro pickleball or you've seen high level pickleball, usually this left side player will creep onto this side because they have a forehand in the middle. So this applies mainly to like easy shots where you have time to move over and smash the ball. However, in rec play, you see a lot of confusion as to who should cover the middle. A lot of time, the ball goes straight through. This has happened to everyone. I'm sure it's happened to you. So what do? There's a few different ways to handle this. If you and your partner are on the same page and you want to play the pro style and you're both righty, the left side player should just do all the work. And they should creep over and take the easy shots in the middle. It reduces confusion and it reduces the chances that balls go down the center. But there's another instance where your partner is a lefty. Or maybe they just don't know that this is what you're supposed to do. In this instance, there's two ways to handle it. The first is that before the game, you look at your partner and say, hey, I'm gonna cover the middle when I'm on the left side. Or you say, I'm gonna be the more aggressive player and cover the middle. And then you can be the one that's dominating in the middle and they should back off and let you take those balls. If you don't want to talk to them though, there is another strategy and it's just to get aggressive and try to go for the middle balls whenever you can. By doing this, there's not really much of a downside. Worst case, you hit your partner's paddle, but you guarantee that someone is there to hit the ball. What you don't want to do is just be all passive, not really want to go for the ball because you're afraid you're going to hit your partner. Never do that. Choose one of those two options and you're going to never let any balls go through the middle and you're going to play much better as a result. And if you want to watch another video where me and Kennedy take you through more basic tips, watch this.